I didn't want to die. I didn't see much chance of living, but I was gradually getting frozen up. And by the grace of God, I came across a lifeboat, and they pulled me in. And there was a fireman dead in the bottom, and there was about a foot of water in this boat.
More than 60 years after the Titanic slipped beneath the Atlantic, Frank Prentice could still feel the cold on his skin, still hear the screams echoing through the dark. Even after a lifetime, his voice trembled when he spoke of that night. Prentice wasn't just any passenger, he was the ship's assistant purser, a man trained to remain calm when others panicked, but nothing could have prepared him for what he witnessed or what he didn't. For decades, the world believed the Titanic struck an iceberg with catastrophic force, but for those who were there, like Prentice, the truth felt far stranger. There was no violent jolt, no tearing of steel, only 4 deep, hollow thuds from somewhere within the ship. What followed wasn't a collision. It was chaos, the kind no history book ever truly captured. So what really tore the Titanic apart that night? Was it the steel that failed her? The fire that had already been burning below? Or something else entirely? Something planned and buried beneath a lie? Frank Prentice never found his answers until now. More than a century later, researchers are uncovering something he could never have imagined. Because if the iceberg wasn't the true cause of the disaster, then the real story is only just beginning. For over a century, whispers have lingered that the Titanic's destruction wasn't caused by an iceberg alone, that the official story may have hidden something darker. It sounds impossible until you listen to what survivors actually said. Many didn't recall the grinding of ice against steel. They described explosions deep, muffled booms echoing from below. Some saw flashes of light. Others felt shock waves rising through the decks. Even crew members reported blows from beneath. Officials dismissed these as panic. Yet decades later, researchers found the testimonies strikingly consistent. One explanation is mechanical. The Titanic's high-pressure boilers, shaken by the collision, could have ruptured, sending concussive blasts through the hull, but others believe the damage came from outside or inside by intent. In 1912, global tensions ran high. Rival empires and financiers were locked in competition. Among Titanic's elite passengers were several men who opposed the creation of the U.S. Federal Reserve. To some, the sinking looked too timely to be coincidence. A single detonation or a torpedo from a shadowed ship could have silenced opposition in one night. Survivors also recalled a mysterious light on the horizon officially said to be the SS Californian. Yet some claimed it moved, as if observing, combined with reports of blasts. It painted an unsettling possibility. Modern scans of the wreck reveal inward bent steel plates damaged more like an explosion than an ice scrape. None of it proves foul play, but together it raises doubt. Was it truly an iceberg that doomed the Titanic, or something far more deliberate, echoing from the depths? If the iceberg story leaves cracks in the legend, this theory tears it wide open. It's called the switch theory, and it claims the ship that sank on April 15, 1912 wasn't the Titanic at all, but her twin, the RMS Olympic. If true, the disaster wasn't an accident. It was an insurance scheme gone fatally wrong. The Olympic and Titanic were built side by side in Belfast, nearly identical in size and design. But in 1911, the Olympic collided with the warship HMS Hawke, leaving her hull bent and her keel permanently weakened. Repairs were costly, and the White Star Line, already in debt, faced ruin. The Titanic, however, was brand new and fully insured. According to the theory, the company swapped them the damaged Olympic disguised as the Titanic, and the real Titanic quietly renamed Olympic to take her place. The supposed plan wasn't murder, it was fraud. The Titanic would suffer a staged accident, passengers rescued, and the company would collect the insurance payout. But the plan spiraled out of control. The ship went down faster than anyone expected, taking over 1,500 lives. Evidence cited by believers includes worker rumors of a switch, and the fact that White Star owner J.P. Morgan, along with several executives, canceled their trip at the last minute. Even the wreck itself raises questions. The number and placement of portholes match the Olympic, not the Titanic's blueprints. Skeptics call it impossible, arguing such a deception would require silence from thousands. But supporters counter that only a few needed to know, if they're right. The ship that sank wasn't a triumph of engineering, but a ghost of financial desperation, an elaborate illusion doomed from the moment it left port. Even if you ignore talk of torpedoes or ship swaps, one mystery refuses to fade. Why did the Titanic carry so few lifeboats? More than 200 people were aboard that night, yet space for barely half. That decision turned a maritime accident into one of history's greatest human tragedies, and some believe it wasn't just arrogance or oversight, The Titanic carried only 20 lifeboats, enough for 178 people, on paper. This met British law at the time, which based lifeboat requirements on a ship's tonnage, not its passenger capacity. But Titanic was twice as large as any ship those laws were written for. There was room for twice as many boats, but the White Star Line declined to add them, officially. They said too many lifeboats would clutter the decks and spoil the luxury aesthetic. Unofficially, it served the myth they were selling the ship was unsinkable. To prepare for disaster would be to admit it was possible. Some historians call it negligence. Others see something darker. If the disaster was in any way foreseen or worse. Planned fewer lifeboats meant fewer survivors, and therefore fewer witnesses to contradict the official story. In that light, the shortage wasn't an oversight, but control. Even those limited boats weren't used properly. Lifeboat number 1 built for 40 left, with just 12 aboard. Lifeboat 6 carried 28 of its 65 available seats. Confusion explains part of it, but not all. Survivor accounts suggest class and privilege played a role. First-class passengers were guided to safety, while hundreds below deck never even reached the upper levels. J. Bruce Ismay, chairman of the White Star Line, escaped in a lifeboat himself, a decision that branded him a coward for life. After the rescue, the mystery deepened. The lifeboats were towed to New York, documented briefly, and then vanished. Some were reportedly returned to the company, others lost without record. The British Board of Trade faced criticism, but no one was held accountable. Designer Alexander Carlisle later testified that he'd proposed twice as many lifeboats before launch, but his warning was dismissed. White Star Line valued image over safety, negligence or intent. The outcome was the same: over 1,500 lives lost to icy water, and to decisions made long before the ship ever met the iceberg. The missing lifeboats became more than an oversight. They became a symbol of what happens when human pride sails too far ahead of caution. Of all the theories tied to the Titanic, few are as audacious as this: that its sinking wasn't an accident or an insurance scam, but an assassination at sea, according to this claim. The tragedy conveniently eliminated several of the world's wealthiest men who stood firmly against the creation of the U.S. Federal Reserve. In 1912, America's banking system was chaotic and unstable. Powerful financiers were pushing for a central bank to consolidate monetary control and prevent financial crises. But critics warned it would hand unchecked power to private bankers, allowing a small elite to dominate the economy. Among those opponents were 3 of the richest men alive: Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidor Straus, and John Jacob Astor IV. All 3 boarded the Titanic. All 3 died in the North Atlantic. Meanwhile, J.P. Morgan, one of the most influential supporters of the Federal Reserve and the owner of the White Star Line, had reserved a private suite aboard the Titanic. His luggage and artwork were loaded on board, yet just before sailing, Morgan canceled, citing health reasons. To believers, this was no coincidence. The voyage, they say, was doomed from the start. Less than a year later, in December 1913, the Federal Reserve Act was signed into law, reshaping global finance. To conspiracy theorists, the timing is too perfect: 3 powerful opponents dead. The law passed, and Morgan's influence unscathed. Adding fuel to the suspicion, other prominent men, Henry Clay Frick, Milton Hershey, and several tied to Morgan's inner circle, also canceled their trips at the last minute. Business conflicts, luck, or quiet warning. Skeptics dismiss the theory as speculation built on coincidence. They note that the central bank movement was already in motion and that the deaths of 3 men, while tragic, wouldn't have changed its course. Yet, the details: Morgan's control of the shipping line, his sudden withdrawal, and the proximity of the law's passage still invite uneasy questions. Whether truth or myth, this theory endures because it reflects a timeless suspicion that great tragedies sometimes serve greater powers. If the Titanic was indeed part of a calculated plan, then the ship that carried dreams across the Atlantic may also have carried the seeds of a new financial empire, one built not just on money, but on silence. Of all the unanswered questions surrounding the Titanic, few are as haunting as this: what was the ship that watched from the horizon, and why didn't it help survivors? Spoke of a distant vessel, its lights faint but steady, visible through the cold Atlantic night. Officers on the Titanic's bridge saw it too. Distress rockets were fired again and again, yet the ship never moved. That vessel was officially identified as the SS Californian, a British steamer said to be only a few miles away. Had it responded, hundreds of lives might have been saved, but it didn't. Captain Stanley Lord, the Californian's master, later testified that his wireless operator had gone to bed, and that the ship had stopped for the night after ice warnings. His crew admitted seeing rockets but insisted they didn't recognize them as distress signals. They thought the distant liner was simply at anchor. The explanation, while plausible, never fully satisfied investigators or the public. Even in 1912, white distress rockets were a universal call for help. Why didn't anyone wake the radio operator? Why didn't the Californian at least attempt to signal back? The story of a nearby ship idly watching a catastrophe unfold felt too strange, too deliberate. Conspiracy theorists argue that's because it was deliberate. If the Titanic's sinking was planned, whether for insurance, secrecy, or sabotage, the Californian may have been part of the operation, stationed to observe and ensure no rescue interfered. Details only deepen the unease. The Californian's true position was never clear. Some reports said 20 miles away. Others, far less. The ship's log contained contradictions, and several crew members altered their testimony. The wireless operator had received Titanic's messages earlier that night, so ignorance seems unlikely. Others insist it wasn't the Californian at all, but another vessel, the Norwegian sealer Samson, illegally hunting nearby and fleeing the scene to avoid arrest, but no proof ever surfaced. Whatever ship it was, one thing remained certain: it saw the Titanic's distress rockets and did nothing. That silent silhouette on the horizon remains one of the most chilling mysteries ever to drift across the North Atlantic. Amid theories of sabotage and switched ships, one explanation stands out for its simplicity and its evidence. It suggests that the Titanic's fate was sealed before it even left port, by a fire smoldering deep within its hull, for weeks before departure. A coal fire reportedly burned inside one of the ship's massive bunker rooms. Such fires weren't rare on steamships of the era. Coal could spontaneously ignite under its own weight. But this one was different. Crew members later testified that the blaze was intense and stubborn, damaging the steel bulkhead that separated several compartments. When the Titanic struck the iceberg, that weakened section lay exactly where the collision occurred. The theory argues that the steel, already heat-stressed and brittle, gave way instantly, allowing water to flood multiple compartments at once, instead of staying afloat for hours. The ship sank in barely 2.5. In 2008, researchers uncovered pre-launch photos showing a dark streak on the hull precisely at the impact zone. Fire experts identified it as possible heat damage. Survivor accounts reinforced the claim stokers recalled shoveling burning coal throughout the voyage, fighting a fire they couldn't fully extinguish. Why wasn't this made public pride and profit? The Titanic was the White Star Line's masterpiece, advertised as unsinkable. Admitting to a serious fire before launch would have been a scandal. Delaying departure could have cost fortunes. So they sailed, hoping the fire would fade on its own. Modern metallurgical studies back the theory steel exposed to high heat can lose up to 75% of its strength. A small impact at the fire-damaged bulkhead could have doomed the ship. The iceberg didn't sink a perfect vessel, it struck one already wounded. Titanic's end, in this view, wasn't pure misfortune, but the result of human pride burning quietly below deck. When the Titanic slipped beneath the Atlantic, more than 1,500 souls were lost, yet only about 340 bodies were ever recovered. The rest, over 1,000 men, women, and children simply vanished into the dark. That absence has haunted families and historians for over a century. Where did they go? And why were so few ever brought home? In the weeks after the sinking, recovery ships like the Mackay Bennett sailed from Halifax to comb the debris field. What they found was heartbreaking bodies adrift among wreckage, some in life jackets, others not. Crews worked tirelessly to retrieve and identify what they could. Many were buried at sea, wrapped in canvas, and given brief prayers before being lowered into the cold depths. After just 3 weeks, the mission was called off officially due to storms, currents, and limited storage. For grieving families, that answer felt incomplete. Survivors had described hundreds floating in the water that night. Why then? Did search teams find so few nature played its part, currents scattered the dead across hundreds of miles, and cold water eventually pulled them under? Some may still rest within the ship itself, sealed by collapsing steel and sediment. But human decisions also shaped the outcome. Records show first-class victims were prioritized for recovery and identification. While many steerage passengers and crew were buried at sea, cost, class, and corporate pressure to move on dictated who was brought home and who was forgotten. That haste fueled darker suspicions that ending the search early helped suppress questions about negligence or worse. Fewer bodies meant fewer autopsies, fewer contradictions, and fewer clues. Today, the wreck lies in silence, strewn with shoes, coats, and the ghostly outlines of lives cut short. Over 1,000 remain unfound silent witnesses to a tragedy still echoing through the deep. Every great disaster leaves questions, but what makes the Titanic different is how swiftly those questions were silenced. Within weeks, the world was given a tidy explanation: an iceberg, a tragic accident, an unsinkable ship undone by fate. It was a narrative clean enough to soothe grief and to protect the powerful. Both the U.S. Senate and the British Board of Trade launched inquiries almost immediately. Their goal, officially, was truth. In reality, they read more like damage control, instead of probing contradictions in survivor testimony. The focus stayed fixed on a single story: the iceberg caused everything. Witnesses who spoke of explosions below deck or strange lights on the horizon were quietly minimized. Reports of ignored ice warnings, missing binoculars, and excessive speed were acknowledged but never pursued. The verdict was simple: no one could have foreseen the disaster. Why such haste? Many historians believe it was to shield the shipping industry from ruin. The Titanic's loss had already shaken public confidence in ocean travel. A messy investigation exposing negligence or worse could have destroyed the White Star Line and its parent company, J.P. Morgan's International Mercantile Marine. Framing it as a tragic act of nature allowed business to go on. Others see deeper motives. If theories of sabotage or deliberate deceit held any truth, those responsible had every reason to bury the evidence. The inquiries were overseen by men with ties to the very industry they investigated. No executives faced charges. Captain Edward Smith, lost with a ship, took the blame. Crucial records disappeared: missing testimony, vanished radio logs, unanswered questions about the Californian. To skeptics, it wasn't confusion, it was containment. A century later, the Titanic story still endures, not just for its tragedy, but for its silence. The iceberg may have sunk the ship, but the truth was sunk with it. More than a century after it vanished beneath the waves, the Titanic still rests in silence 12,500 feet down, where sunlight never reaches. Two great halves of a legend lie scattered across the seabed, surrounded by a field of debris that once carried life, laughter, and dreams. Over the years, cameras have captured eerie glimpses of chandeliers, shoes, dinner plates, even unopened bottles of wine. Yet for everything we've seen, there's far more we haven't. Access to the wreck has always been tightly controlled. Most expeditions operate under secrecy, their footage and findings locked away. Some say it's to protect the site from exploitation. Others whisper it's to protect the narrative. But what exactly remains to be found? Some believe there are hidden compartments or sealed areas inside the wreck, that no expedition has reached, rooms that could hold personal belongings, ship records, or even evidence that might support or challenge some of the long-standing theories. New drones and remotely operated vehicles are making it possible to explore deeper and with less damage, revealing corners of the ship never seen before. There's also the question of human remains. Officially, no bodies were recovered from the wreck, but many experts believe that human remains may still exist, preserved in the cold, dark depths, for ethical reasons. The site has been designated a maritime memorial, and no human remains have been exhumed. But some divers claim to have seen clothing, shoes, and outlines of what might have once been people. What lies beneath may never be fully known. But one thing is certain: the Titanic story didn't end in 1912. It continues to unfold in the darkness, where cold steel meets silence, and where history still sleeps under 12,500 feet of water.